Hey, tonight on the Old Time Mini Show, we're going to finish making a mold for this multi-part insectoid Vrusk, which is our most complicated PC model yet. Hey everybody, if you're watching live here on Thursday night, welcome to Dan's Old Time Mini Show again. I think this is episode 10, I think. And back as always, thanks so much for checking in that I've got this working properly on both Twitch and YouTube and Restream That's appreciated as always. So, so we are, if you're new to the stream here, I'm duplicating using old school techniques, making molds, with my hands, and casting in my own kitchen out of lead-based metals. And so at the moment what I'm working on is miniatures from the TSR Star Frontiers science fiction game from the early 80s. And I did start a campaign in this about 2 weeks back, I think. I just had one, session 0 really. Good response to begin with. For what it's worth, we're playing again tomorrow night, and I think we have a new player joining us at that point. So I'm kind of curious which of the alien races the new player is going to pick, right? Possibly humans or Dralicites or the Vrusk here that we're currently working on. So the blobby Dralicites worked basically, and the monkey Azerians basically worked, but I am being challenged by these insectoid Vrusk because they do have a whole bunch of spindly legs. They have 8 spindly legs each, and they're bent in weird ways, and they kind of cross over each other in a couple places. So at the moment, we are halfway done. Got started making those last week, and it is a 2-part miniature. So you have the back thorax of the insect creature, and then you have the front head part, kind of like they're a centaur. So I think this is the first time I'm making a multi-part miniature here. And I got both parts started last week. So today we're going to dig these out. We're going to flip them over, see how they're doing so well. Pour the rubber for the other half of both of the 2-part molds. And hope this is working. So we'll see. I mean, probably the real test is going to be next week when we cast it. But we'll see whether this is a totally crashing and burning right now. I guess the other thing, what are we doing new here? So I made new pore holes out of green stuff, and hopefully that's going to help. And we also, what was the other new thing we were doing? Right, I was trying to mix the rubber more carefully to avoid bubbles, because I have been having on these PC models, I've been having more bubbles show up, which causes blobs on the casts that you don't want. So I was trying to stir the rubber really, really carefully, trying to pour in the corner. What was it? What did we do? So this one, I used a brush and brushed on the rubber for a single layer. And then this one, I just carefully poured in the corner to get it to get the rubber to ooze over the miniature and try to avoid bubbles. And already I do think that there were fewer bubbles coming up on the surface than I'm accustomed to seeing. So I think that's a good sign. But when we dig it out tonight, I think we'll have a kind of a better sign about whether that's working or not. So so here we go. So the first thing, of course, is to dig this out, get all the modeling clay out. That's a little bit of a chore, but that's the first part of part 2. I will say again, if you're new to the show, I should throw out a safety warning. I am working with miniatures from the 80s and metal that I'm using myself that are lead-based. I think it's like 53% lead. So I'm careful to avoid places where I might have food service. I'm careful to, not get it in my mouth. I'm not a kid. And then I did that enough when I was a kid. And then carefully wash my hands afterwards. And as well, the silicone rubber and the release agent I use both have vapors that they pour off. So I've got, you want to use that in a well-ventilated space. I have my windows here open in Brooklyn, even though it got cool again tonight. Again. And I also have an air quality monitor on my desk. And right now it looks great. Actually, the air quality monitor right now says the best quality air that I ever have in here. So at the moment, I'm feeling pretty peppy. So hopefully that continues. You might be able to do better than I do if you have a more professional workspace with a ventilation fan might be even better. But I think this works okay for me. And the other thing I got to point out as I get started here is don't forget we are on the Wandering DMs channel. We are very excited that in our regular D&D chat show on Sunday, this Sunday, we managed to get Mr. Michael Moorcock is going to be our guest, and we'll be chatting with the legendary author, creator of Elric and the Eternal Champion, and so many other wonderful things. So we feel really, really lucky that we managed to get Mr. Michael Moorcock on Sunday. So if you can join us live this Sunday, it's April 14th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. We'd love to see you in the live chat. And if you have a critical question, hopefully we can get it in to Mike on Sunday. And we would love for you to join us then. So that's kind of a big weekend for us here on the channel. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to start digging this out. So this is the first part, the first mold that I was working on last week. So we'll see how that's coming. I accidentally threw the first brick in the trash. That's a good start. Good start, Dan. Wow. Okay. So the rubber is just slightly sticky on the bricks that I'm using for my mold box, but that's fine. I do the first time I ever used this was on the show on episode 1, and I do like this as our boxing technique. Seems to be working pretty well. So, as always, the bottom part there, where I was using this modeling dough to form the bottom part, poured the rubber on the top part, flip it over so tonight we can pour the other part. So we'll dig this out and see how we're doing so far. Desparrow, good to see you tonight. Glad you could join us. There's a second box to unbox a little later, so if anybody comes in and does miss this, I'll get another go at it. Okay, so there's the new pour hole that we fashioned last week. Try to get that back into place before we rebox it. And I want to do this kind of carefully so I don't move the miniature that's in here. If it shifts noticeably, that would be like doing a Xerox and having the page shift when it's halfway done. My OCD is happy. Thank you for commenting on that. Actually, I really appreciate that. Yes, the sides are coming up a lot more square. A little bit of a ridge here, but that doesn't mind. It's nice square corners. That actually does make me happy. I wasn't going to say it out loud until you brought it up, but yes, that I did notice that. Into the box. Why? That is the third thing in a row that I've thrown in the trash by accident. What the heck? So thanks to viewer support, thanks to viewers like you, I managed to remember the registers, the little tabs that connect the two parts together. So I'm super glad you guys were here last week at the critical moment to say, don't forget about the registers. do enjoy this process, and as I've said before, this digging out process is probably the least fun of everything that happens here. But it is what it is. At some point, I'll say, I actually, what I've skipped so far is making human miniatures for Star Frontiers. I got to do that at some point. So at the moment, I'm using like toy soldiers, or I'm actually asking my players to bring Warhammer 40K figures or something. That obviously seems a little bit easier to procure stand-ins or things with nice variety. But I ought to have some officially branded stuff on the table at some point. Now, if you know the classic, you know, I will say, I mean, I did go looking for sci-fi. So William's coming up with a good point here in the chat. I did go looking for, I mean, we discussed some of this on our Discord server, right? I went looking for some possibly retro sci-fi figures. And, you know, it seems harder to find than I thought. I certainly couldn't find any pre-painted plastic stuff like you can find for a lot of fantasy stuff nowadays. And I think William, I think you were one who pointed out to a particular brand that would be helpful for that. But even that, I think you'd still had to paint them on your own stuff. I was kind of hoping to just pick up some stuff for cheap that was pre-painted. It's funny because weirdly, a number of the people that I role play with have recently gotten into or gotten back into miniature wargaming, like Warhammer. So they just kind of happen to be in this same zone of prepping and priming and painting miniatures a lot at the moment for their Warhammer armies. And it's kind of funny because, of course, the Warhammer people, as you know, are super picky about, right? When you play Warhammer, you got to have branded Games Workshop stuff, and it has to be prepared, and it has to be painted properly. And I haven't done that myself, but they were telling me an anecdote about like people going to a Warhammer event and like furiously painting miniatures on the train there in order to get them tournament legal, or whatever they say for that. So the partner of one of my players, right, thinks that's the way that all miniature wargaming works, is that you must have a particular brand and they must be painted a particular way. And so we were chatting just a little bit about like my book of war game, and I'm like, I don't care. Get something cheap that you like. I don't, show up with Legos. I'm fine with that. If I can get anybody to play at all, that'd be great. And they were like, I see, okay. All right, that's looking pretty good. I mean, I hope, like how I, kind of looking at how I covered it up, attempting to get the two-part mold seal on like the thickest part of the miniature. I think that's probably going to work, I hope. Yeah, Disparel, I think that like when I was thinking about what could I use for sci-fi miniatures, certainly Warhammer 40K is the first thing that came to mind. And just fortunately, my players just happened to be playing it, so it seemed win-win. still, at some point, I'm going to want some official, Star Frontier stuff. Although I suppose if I put the two of them together, probably, quite possibly, the 40K stuff is going to be visibly bigger than stuff from the 80s, as the stuff is kind of swollen in size over time. Hopefully, not too bad. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, thanks for the reminder there, William. Right, Reaper, CAV, and Chronoscope lines, right? If you're new to the stream, some of what we're talking about came up earlier on our Discord server. And so here at the Wandering DMs channel, we do have a Discord server and a Patreon. So if you go to patreon.com/wanderingdms, every single tier gets you on our Discord server. And we have these kinds of conversations going on all the time about classic role-playing and new role-playing and miniature games and miniature modeling. And some of our patrons do a much better painting creation job than I do, frankly. But I try. I enjoy it. So I get a little cotton swab here with a little bit of water on it. Trying to pick up some of that modeling dough there. I will say with the Yazirians, I'm not going to claim that I was 100% completely thrilled with the detail that I got on the Yazirians, the monkey creatures. Yeah, I don't know if somewhere in the mold making or the priming or the painting, it kind of came out a little bit flat on me. So I'm going to try to be maybe a little bit more careful going forward. Iron Wind, interesting. Interesting. That seems new. I think that's new to me, Disparrow. Thank you. And William, right, there was in the two boxes I have for Star Frontiers, the 82 box and the 1983 box, there was a significant difference in the sizes, but it wasn't consistent. I think like the Yazirians got bigger and the Vrusk got smaller, I think. So it seems like it was kind of a random number game about who sculpted what or something. I mean, notably, the two-part Vrusk was from the 1982 box, and we've talked about this before. And the 1983 box had smaller one-part Vrusk, where, and when I dig this other one out, you're going to see the spindly legs. And the 1983 box, they were all kind of like, an illusion of just like one lump of metal. So they were either trying to make it simpler to cast in the manufacturing or save metal or something. And meanwhile, the Yazirians weirdly got bigger. So, I should also make Centaur at some point, right? I'm saving that. They're not gonna show up in my actual game for a while, but I should have some of the evil, wormy Centaur available. Partly because we were all kind of surprised at how big those were. Like the Centaur towered over the giant worms that tower over everybody else. So I actually kind of like the impact of that. Just Sparrow, I'm laughing at Barsoom with the serial numbers filed off. You can pick up a bootleg copy of Gary Gygax's Warriors of Mars and play that with them. Okay, that's pretty clean. That's actually probably cleaner than I usually get it. A little bit around the underside. I guess that's another reason to try to get the mold cut right in the widest part, because otherwise I have an underside that catches some stuff. Like right there, actually. There you go. Get off the... Ugh. Do you wish that the John Carter movie had, like, been more commercially successful so we had a series of John Carter movies? I frequently wish that. I mean, it's working for Dune, so, yeah. What's the diff? Did anyone ever make a Dune role-playing game? Now that I say that. I once had a Dune, like, board war game at some point. Which was one of the weirdest playing games I ever had in my life. Okay. I like that. This guy's like, you know, 3-part hand, right? He's had a glob of clay in it that I'm trying to dig out here. That's a tricky bit. All right. That is probably cleaner than I normally get that. I agree with you, Disparrow. I do think the John Carter movie was poorly marketed. I do agree with that. A good streaming property. I see that. Yeah, I can see that. Kind of like the Amazon Lord of the Rings type thing or something like that. Maybe that's not a great example to hold out. Okay. You know, at the risk of I don't know, being disliked, something I finally saw in the last couple days, the way that I watch stuff, is I finally watched the Marvel. Is it the most recent Marvel film? The most recent Marvel film? The Marvels? On Disney Plus. And, you know, I hope you'll forgive me if I say that's the worst Marvel movie I have seen. It's so bad. I was doing a lot of fast forwarding through particular scenes. And the middle act is so bad. I couldn't believe it. And the thing is that on the one hand, I adored the Captain Marvel movie. I've watched it multiple times. I love that it's set in the 90s. I love the music. I love all kinds of stuff about it. And in this sequel, what they did to the character is almost unforgivable. You know, tonally, I think many people agree it's tonally inconsistent. I think many people will agree with that. Okay. Oof. So yeah. All right. So there's me digging out at least the head part of our Vrusk miniature with the outstretched weapons there on both sides. Going to start in on that seems very close. Extreme close-up. So now I'm going to start digging out the torso part, and this is potentially the more complicated part because this is the one that's got the 8 legs in all kinds of different directions. And this is the one that I did second. I did not paint the rubber on this. I just started pouring in the corner kind of slowly, which itself is kind of weirdly hypnotic. It's interesting. So you could make it's interesting. You make a John Carter series where basically each chapter is an episode. Clever. I like that. That seems like a solid idea to me. You know, this week, right? So I'm watching the Marvels painfully, and that movie cost $250 million to make, and supposedly in order to make its money back with the marketing, they had to make at least 450 million, I think. And I'm like, it's cringy. And meanwhile, I'm also watching X-Men '97, which is like, it's not great animation, frankly, but the theme song kicks ass. And it's like really good. It's really good. I think probably some people were chatting. Probably some people online were chatting because the new episode dropped yesterday, and things occurred, things happened, and I think some people were chatting about it yesterday online. X-Men '97 is like, again, you know, like somehow it being cheaper allowed them the artistic freedom to actually take risks. And it's quite a number of times that like I yelp out loud while I'm watching it. Yeah, Star Wars, right? You know what I was thinking the other day? Thinking of like science fiction stuff, is at this point, what character has the most screen time in the Star Wars canon? Is it now the Mandalorian? Like, is the Mandalorian now like the longest running character in the Star Wars canon? Like, let's limit ourselves to like live action film or TV. That felt like a weird. It felt like a weird thought when that occurred to me. Movies should not have homework. They're doing that too much, right? I mean, this has been. I mean, I feel like they crossed an important line with all the Disney Plus series. Like, frankly, WandaVision I loved right up until the ending, and they have got to make these things more self-contained. There's no question about it. They've got to make these properties self-contained. You can't end everything on a lead-in on an ad for another property, and you can't have every lead-in be you needed to watch 3 other films. Like, I have already watched all those. Well, you know what? I actually didn't watch all of the Ms. Marvel series. Well, and you know what? That's a pretty good example, frankly. Like, I love Captain Marvel, right? I did not like the Ms. Marvel series. I couldn't get through it, right? They're very tonally different. They're for different types of audiences, and to take those two things, and obviously the name makes you think this, but to take those two different sensibility properties and put them together was just essentially a bad idea. Like, Captain Marvel is a super badass, and Ms. Marvel is this funny, you know, suburban teenager semi-comedy, and trying to mash those together was, you know, no one's going to be happy. Oh God, the middle of that movie was, oh. I got a TED talk about the Loki show. You know what? I love Hiddleston as Loki so much. The last good Thor movie, I was like, oh, if this is the last time I see these guys on screen together, this was truly epic. I love him so much. I did watch all of Loki season 1 and was like, oh, they're wrecking the character. They're wrecking the character. I have not been able to queue up for season 2. Probably around when they were like, oh, haha, we have a whole drawer full of Infinity Stones that don't work here. Ha ha ha. There were a dime a dozen. I was like, ugh. Now, Jonathan, I feel like it's an interesting question. Is that a fundamental problem with ongoing comic book style universes? I feel like they did pretty well for a long time, and I think part of it for me, as I think back, is that there actually was a legitimate thought out plan in the early times, so that like the post credit teaser scenes always legitimately had payoffs. Like what they were talking about actually happened later on. And, after that, what do they call it? Beat 1 or Tier 1 or Chapter 1. They started to have kind of throwaway like promises that they didn't deliver on. So... like anything, it can work. I've seen it work okay. So this is where this is going to get tricky, right? So I'm digging out the bottom part of this guy's multi-leg thing. And so on the next rubber pour, I'm hoping to cover this up and I hope properly. The really funny thing is that so the Marvels is the lowest rated. I think it's the 33rd Marvel film. It's the lowest rated Marvel film, I believe. It lost the most money, I think. And the funny thing is that after the fact, Bob Iger at Disney, right, was like, well, the problem with the Marvels is that we didn't have enough executive oversight over it. And everybody, to my knowledge, like every Marvel creator, director all did like a mutual spit take all at the same time. It's like the amount of executive oversight in one of these Marvel productions is completely strangling. Is pretty much what everybody said all at once. Yeah, clearly DC has to do something different at the moment, at least. So we'll see. So obviously, with their basic, with DC's basic reboot with Mr. Guardians of the Galaxy, there, we'll see how that goes. Clever. I feel with Harley Quinn in DC, fascinating character, and everything I hear is that Margot Robbie is some kind of like next level superhero actor, that there's nothing she can't do, and that they routinely hire these expert, jugglers, acrobats, fighters, whatever, and Margot will like study them for a day, go off for a weekend, and then she'll come back on Monday and she can do everything. over and over again, which sounds amazing. But I did hear that supposedly, I guess, like, Gillian Jacobs had been in the running for that, if I didn't misunderstand that, for Harley Quinn. And now I'm like, I'm kind of really curious what she'd have done with it. Some people really don't like Gillian Jacobs, I know. Yeah, she is. Right. We should get we should get Margot Robbie to play Taskmaster in Marvel. Now so they actually did have that character allegedly show up in the Black Widow movie. Cast as a woman there. So I don't know if we'll ever get that. So I don't know. We could recast her. Particularly if she doesn't show up in the DCU anymore. William, you're saying they improvised a bunch of Iron Man 1? I think I'd heard that. Which makes sense for those guys, right? And to this day, Iron Man 1 is arguably maybe at least one of my top 3. And, partly because it's about something else. Iron Man's a nice movie, but it's not just the standard hero cycle origin story. It's about some real world stuff. And, as time goes on, it becomes harder and harder for them to, make a statement about real world issues like that. Which I feel like that's the best fantasy fiction, when it allows you to talk about something that you normally wouldn't be able to talk about. Interesting. Whatever they did in Iron Man 1, Favreau really did a great job. He used what he had. That whole universe is thanks to him setting the right tone. Wow, this is going to take a while to dig out, frankly. Ouch. Yeah. Maybe I spoke too soon. Did anybody watch Birds of Prey? What did anybody think about that? God, this is like so much to dig out. I'm going to spend this whole... Normally I stream for about 2 hours, and I feel like I'm going to spend at least half of it just digging out this one part with all these legs. I forget it. I'm not even close enough to the DC stuff to know about that Warner Brothers issue. Do you have an old toothbrush? That might be faster. That's a good idea. I have some brushes. Actually, I have a brush on my desk right now, not a toothbrush. I feel like I'm not at the point yet where I can use that, because I still have this stuff in between the legs I got to dig out. that. This may possibly be the only two-part Vrusk model that I duplicate. This is a big, giant pain. You know, when I used to work in video games, I got my start at Papyrus Racing, that did NASCAR and IndyCar simulations, and so they had to separately license the tour, right? The name of the races, all the separate race tracks, all the separate drivers, all the separate cars and the tires and the sponsors. And so they had to go running around. They had a dedicated licensing department. And that wasn't a very huge company. It was like maybe 100 employees total. But the bread and butter was entirely in these licensed racing games. And they had to have an entire dedicated licensing department just to run around full time and cut deals with every single separate entity involved. So I can only imagine what the licensing is for these multi-billion-dollar movie empires. Birds of Prey never really got started. Yeah, it felt like another. I mean, again, I've said it before. It seems like these origin story movies are fairly easy to do. And in Captain Marvel, maybe that's another example. Like the origin and setup seems like we've said this before. Hollywood knows how to do that, and they just don't know how to do the second sequel. They just don't know how to do movie number 2. Making superhero sequels, they make it look really hard. And I think in my opinion, it's only succeeded a very small number of times, mostly by the Russo brothers. Okay, that's all right. Let's try brushing it a bit. There's still a lot of stuff in there. Cleaning out the head part was kind of like, oh, this is relaxing and small and doable, and cleaning out this part is like, ugh. This is a pain. But we knew that this was the single most complicated miniature in the whole set, and I kind of built up to this intentionally. But it's one of the player characters, so I need to have it on the table. Like I said last week, it's the first player character. When I gave my players the option, this was when someone spoke up and made the first choice, this was it. So. You know, the interesting thing in the backstory in the Star Frontiers lexicon, as I refamiliarized with myself with it, it's kind of an interesting beat, and it's almost the very first thing in the book, is that you have these 4 spacefaring races, humans, Dralcites, Usurians, and Vrusk, that met in space. They didn't all develop space travel simultaneously. In fact, they didn't all develop space travel. The one that actually developed it first was the Vrusk. These guys are the ones that actually developed space travel, and then they did like a contact deal with everybody else. So the first thing that actually happened for the humans was they developed subspace communications, made contact with the Vrusk, and the Vrusk sent them plans for spaceships. And I thought that was kind of an interesting beat, that in this universe, humans didn't manage to develop space travel on their own. So it's kind of interesting that they had to trust the plans that got sent them weren't like a self-destruction machine or something like that. Yeah, right? I didn't remember that until I started digging into the books again. It's on the one hand, it's almost like a throwaway line, but it's the first line in the book. And I kind of like that. Yep, this is all in the original book. The basic rule book on the inside cover says that. The Gygax hated it. It's not entirely a humanocentric universe. Step 1 getting to space. Trust the scary bugs. I'm going to take a wild stab and say that the guys that tried to do a bootleg version a couple of years ago probably retconned that little bit, I would guess, maybe. Well, thank you, Lord Pseudo. Thank you for that idea. You know, the funny thing at the moment is that when I take a break during the day, I've actually gotten in the habit of playing the arcade version of Rampage on a MAME simulator. They actually have that on the Internet Archive. And I've gotten to a point where, like, I played a game today. The problem is I get better, it takes longer. So at the moment, on one quad or just playing alone, I can play Rampage for about 20-25 minutes. It crossed my mind to do that on a stream, but that's probably not super interesting. God, these monsters. Too many legs. I like the arcade Rampage. I mean, again, maybe that's a nostalgia thing for me. Maybe it was in the right time. I like the sound design. I like giant kaiju monsters in general as a concept. I think it might have been a little bit fresh that you're sort of playing the bad guys. So there's a number of things about it that hit me the right way. I've played other simulated arcade stuff, and it seems like I keep coming back to Rampage for some reason. This is looking much better. A little bit under the feet. Now, the unlimited quarters is important, actually, because I got to admit, Rampage is clearly set up to be addictive, right? The fact that you can go so many levels, and then when you die, it does just throw in more quarters, and you can play for more. I mean, I guess a lot of games did that at the time. Kind of why I've challenged myself specifically for how far can I go on just one quarter at the end. Okay. Don't jostle it. Some more stuff here. Okay. That looks pretty good by my standards. Apply the cotton swab to that. You know, the feet are obviously going to make concave cavities in the mold. If the mold was entirely stiff, I wouldn't be able to pull it out. But fortunately, the rubber is soft enough that even if you do have like something like this that forms a concave cavity, you can still, I'm pretty sure you can still pull it out. Like there's a lot of demos of doing that for casting people's hands. Isabelle's actually done that with people with people in the past for particular art projects. Just thinking about the topology of this stuff. Or maybe I should say topography. The interesting, you can hear, that's interesting feedback. Quarter. See, I can't do it intentionally. What an interesting observation. Thank you. Yeah, whenever I visit my folks, I'm told that I have a little bit more of a Mainer Irish descent twang in my voice. But I usually can't do that intentionally. With keeping it subtle. I was watching an Irish stand-up, a woman Irish stand-up comedian the other day. I can't remember her name, and she said, I thought she was very good. She said she's been in the States for about 9 or 10 years, and unfortunately she does have a fairly thick accent, and people keep coming up to her, she says, and saying, "Oh, your English is so good." And she's like, "This is the only language I know." That's a terrible thing to say. Because it's my native tongue, and you're acting like I just learned it. And then she said a lot of people try to do an Irish accent, and you think it's one of the few things you can do because we now count as white. So you think it's okay. But I recommend you not do that because inevitably people start off with "top of the morning to you," and then about 2 sentences later they veer off into Jamaican. And you don't want to be there. I laughed pretty hard at that. Stairs. Now, Isabelle, right? Her family did come directly from France, and she was a teenager when she moved over, and so she tells me that the thing that they were completely paranoid about was going into a store and ordering bed sheets, right, and having a really hard time getting the difference in the sound right between sheet and shit. And so they practiced at home, just completely paranoid that they were going to say shit by accident. All right. You know, that's actually cleaning up better than I thought I was going to manage a little while ago. You just have to be kind of patient with it, right? If I was alone, I didn't have anything else to do, maybe I'd be a little bit more zen about this, but it's doable. Someone pronounced bag as bag? Weird. They asked for bed murder. Amusingly, that was me not knowing French. That was approximately the first word that I was taught. I guess they have an idiomatic. I'm going to befoul the YouTube content policies, but I guess they have an idiom of tu me merda, which is pretty funny. I gotta stop. All right. Get down here. I'm going to call that pretty darn good for my normal process. I think I clearly have separation between the various legs. Right. Which is really the tricky thing here. It's these legs here that have me concerned, because they actually cross over each other. Right, they technically, the model doesn't have them touching, but there's no projection I can find that has them on completely different planes. So if those, I'm going to be really surprised if I manage to. It kind of looks like they're touching right now, but they're actually not. I have a tiny little blob of water in there. I'm going to be highly surprised if I manage to get that to come out separate in the cast. That's going to be super tricky. I don't think I do want to pack in that void in the underside. I think, I think that's probably there partly to save metal, which I don't mind. Make it a little lighter, makes sense. And it also has the copyright in it. So I don't know if that's visible on camera. Sometimes I can you see the 1982 TSR in there? Yeah, I think you can see it a little bit, right? So if I could, so I'm kind of challenging myself. I would love for that to come out in the cast. That seems a little bit too light in there, but I'd love to see that. Yeah, I actually agree with that. I don't mind that little bit of saving weight there. I got to duplicate that so that someone can prove what I've done later. This is probably among the... I'd make a really bad criminal. But that's what a good criminal would say, right? Now, speaking of accents, right? So, if you're familiar with the Star Frontiers campaign, the first full session that I'm going to be running tomorrow night, you get your initial spaceship travel. Spoilers coming. Block your ears if you don't want to hear this from the 1982 game. You're on a spaceship and it gets overtaken by space pirates. So I've been doing a little bit of practicing. Of what do alien space pirates sound like. And I it's weird because I didn't used to do this, but I thought now I think it's funny if I go full on like funny pirate voice like I do in my games. So my plan is to go full on, "Arr, matey, we're taking over your ship and we're gonna sell it for parts." But then what are the aliens? What do alien space pirates sound like? Possibly tattooed up? I don't know. There's some pictures of like Dralicites with eye patches, which I'm not entirely sure make sense in the books. But the Vrusk, throw down your weapons. And you will not be harmed. It is the logical thing to do. I'm workshopping that. All right, so I think that's pretty good. So I'm gonna rebox these, and we'll be able to pour the rubber on what was the bottom part here. So canonically, I'm so glad you asked about the Dralicite voice, which might actually be the trickiest, right? Canonically, and another thing I noticed, because I was making stuff up, and then I realized that the book technically does, like every alien race does have a short paragraph about their speech pattern. And so with the Dralicites, it says that they don't have normal lungs, they don't have a normal voice box, so they have to simulate that with an air sac that they made just for that purpose. And again, if you don't know what we're talking about, the Dralicites are these basically sentient amoebas. And they can reform their shape and stuff. And so they basically make a bellows organ on the fly in order to talk. So their speech sounds like bellows. So I've been trying to talk like this as a Dralicite was one of the things I was trying. So what would a pirate Dralicite sound like? You'd better throw down all your weapons or you'll be blown up with this grenade that I'm holding. Get down. Throw down your weapons and give us your valuables now. Where are your toolkits? Something like that, except I don't have enough pirate in there, right? Arr! You're hot. Get in that escape pod, and you'll be shot before you can push the button. Something like that. Yeah, I think all Dralicites do burp talk. I think it's canon. I like the Galaxy Quest reference. Isn't there enough? I'm trying to be gentle with this. probably being a little OCD about that. Put the bottom back on. Like so. Pretty good. Box up this one. Oh, that's good, Jerry. It's funny because one thing I've been having an issue of like distinguishing between Drowsites and Yazirians, because I kind of go for this low. I kind of found myself instinctively doing this low rumbly thing for both. So I'm trying to do this like for the Drowsites. I'm trying to move into this like this husky horse thing, whereas the Yazirians are supposed to be like, I don't know, screamy howly type thing. The Vrusk I can make a little bit more distinct, but on that bit I have to like avoid potentially going into like an offensive zone. So I've been trying to find something that was not super real world, or just not accidentally dumb on my part. Okay, Laura Suda, I'm glad you asked this. How are you handling the miniatures maps? This is a great question. Initially, so good. As you know, the game came with a whole bunch of half-inch counters and a whole bunch of very elaborate, what we'd now call battle maps, right in the box. And the funny thing is that the box set came with all these maps that weren't even used in the box set. You had to buy clever sales mechanism, frankly. So they weren't actually utilized until the first couple of modules were published. And so there was some like, what is this map even for? I don't know. It's a mystery. Get our first product and we'll answer the mystery. So pretty elaborate, very tactical based game. So yeah, as I transition to full scale models, to 25 millimeter models, those maps aren't the right size anymore. So it's interesting because frankly, the answer is fairly obvious. I don't know. Is it obvious? So initially, I thought that I was actually going to go print them at a bigger scale. I thought I was going to like zoom them up in GIMP and then go have them printed at a bigger scale. But A, expensive. B, something else to carry around and store. But I spent a day where I was actually scanning stuff, high res, blowing them up. I was actually making plans to get them printed, such as like the spaceship map that we're going to be using tomorrow. And I don't know, for some reason I didn't think about just using my wet erase map, right? My Chessex wet erase map, which I had out for a Wizards Warzone game. And so for the first game I grabbed it, and for what it's worth, it's got squares on one side and hexes on the other. And I was like, I was doing a training session for session 0. I'm like, yeah, we could just throw this down. And then I'm like, well, why don't I do all the other stuff? Why don't I just draw out all the other stuff? Problem is that most of battle maps don't fit on my standard Chessex 25 by 22. See, now you're gonna see how much thought I put into this. So my Chessex map is 25 by 22 squares. A lot of the Star Frontiers battle maps are like maybe 30 inches wide. Maybe like they might be like 20, maybe like a lot, like 19 by 30 or 18 by 29 or something like that don't fit. So then, like an idiot, I sat down and I started remapping them specifically to fit my battle map size. Right, and I was like, the whole point of why I was doing this in the first place was, here's a prepackaged module set, and I don't have to do a lot of prep time. And then I wound up in the last week or two, remapping, like taking the design, taping the topography, and redesigning it in like my grid mapper program for square stuff, or for outdoor stuff. I actually transitioned some stuff to hex maps, and redrawing the whole thing to make sure they would fit on my wet erase board so we can play that way. And it's pretty close, right? It was pretty close, switching from like 29 inches to 25 inches. So I've actually done that. I've actually redrawn all of it to fit my wet erase board. is the answer that I'm going with now. So less expense. I can do it on the fly. The players will only see what they can see at the time, right? So traditionally, you'd throw out the whole map and you'd even see the internals of the buildings. So now I can just draw what they're immediately seeing, which makes more sense. But I did actually have to redesign all the areas in order to fit my map. Yep. But so on the one hand, okay, so there's my OCD pain. But you know what? It was enjoyable. I think I said that last week. It actually I was like, there was a moment where I was like, I actually do enjoy this kind of map making process and fitting stuff in and rescaling and shifting stuff around. Like maybe you get less width but more height, and I can use that space in a different way. And I was like, this is why we do the hobby. This part is actually kind of interesting and fun. You're right, Larsudo. So all the battle maps were originally all squares. You have the Volturnus planetary map that's hot hexes. So their planetary overland travel maps are in hexes. And then I was like, well, I have my wet erase board has a hex side. For outside, I should use hexes because, frankly, even in session 0, we immediately started playing, and then we had to have a debate about how to deal with diagonals. And I'm like, right, of course this is why you do this. So for outdoor stuff, I just like, I'm going to make the call. I'm going to switch it to hexes. Even like the whole sequence that's in the caverns, like there's a lake of fire. Was it squares? I redrew that to hexes, which in some sense makes more sense actually. So we'll try that probably in 2 sessions and see how the players like it. I think that'll be reasonable. I figure on a particular day I can come in and go, today we're having, we're in an indoors place, so we'll set up the square side of the map. But today we're in an outside wilderness place, so we'll set up the hex side of the map. I will say, for what it's worth, right, the rule book says if you're using miniatures, you should be at a scale of 1 inch equals 5 meters. Now, again, I kind of like having my board scale the same as the miniatures. And so actually, based on the miniature size of 25 millimeters for a human up to the eyes, that really ought to be more like 1 inch equals 2 meters. So I did some math on that. Now, coincidentally, most of the battle maps for the initial campaign are at 1 square equals 2 meters. So that actually just sort of magically synced up, as a matter of fact. That I like. Pretty close to 1 inch equals 5 feet, like you'd normally play D&D at nowadays. Not too surprising there. All right. Okay, so I got things boxed up again, and so I'm going to go in the direction of mixing the silicone rubber to pour here. Now I want to keep going. I feel hopeful about the bubble reduction, but I want to keep going with the same protocol of, this guy gets a coat with a brush, and this part I just pour in the corner. And the question is, what brush did I use? Because it kind of messes up the brush with the rubber on it. I don't have much familiarity with Traveler. In fact, I think like a week ago, I think I had to ask, like, what's even the mechanic that Traveler uses? Like, I thought it was D6s. I wasn't sure. So I have read the initial rule book fairly recently, like a couple of years ago, and I was always looking on. I was always envious of the Trillion Credit Squadron supplement for spaceships, but I have never played Traveler ever, not once. Which might be heresy for role players that do science fiction. But I've actually never played Traveler. I'm going to step into the next room and grab the brush that I use for the rubber here. That's the jobby. So I had rubber on this. I tried really, really hard to clean it up. You wouldn't want to use a good brush for this job. Interesting. You had the box set, but still didn't play it. Fascinating. Fascinating. I think I read an article about how Mark Miller, right? Yes. The creator would run it, and it sounded immensely improvisational. I guess basically about kind of some random charts, and he was just making up a whole adventure on the fly out of whole cloth, which was common at the time. I mean, the whole wilderness D&D play using outdoor survival was clearly entirely improvised. With the percent in lair chances for monsters, that was kind of an essential part of how the game was going to run. So here's the release agent. And if you've seen this before, you know this is the single most toxic thing I've got here, but I'm going to pour it in here to make the release easier when we unseal the molds next week. So in just a second, I'm going to step over to my my window, crack it open, do this while I'm leaning out over my fire escape on the 3rd floor. It's interesting that it's a little bit of a lift to get people into science fiction role-playing. I guess we've talked about that. We need to do you know what? Someday we need to do a Sunday show on Wandering DM specifically about that, because I don't think we specifically just had a discussion about science fiction. And I feel like I want to get at least a couple sessions of this campaign in before I start talking about it. And part of it, like I think Josh in one of our chats on the channel said, what's going to happen is I'm going to have a player that knows more physics than me, and he's going to start debating the physics of something. Whereas with fantasy, we can just kind of hand wave it and go, it's some kind of weird magical world. It's space opera, lore pseudo, maybe, call it what you want. Yeah, and Disparell, you have a very good point there about, right. That's the way the whole business of role playing has gone, right? Is give players fine-tuned control and many choices over the player characters. You're totally right about that. And when I come in to a game, I frequently weird people out as a player. I frequently weird people out by saying I want total randomness, right? I want to. Can I roll my abilities randomly, and let that tell me what class I'm going to get? And some people are super weirded out by that, but then I come up with something that I didn't foresee and they didn't foresee, and it's kind of interesting. All right, let me pour a release agent on this. I'll be right back. I'm being rained on. Oh, for God's sake. We're going to do this. God damn it. So it's raining. I was dealing with I'm getting my miniatures a little bit wet when I'm doing that. I got wet, and then it's windy, and it just blew the release agent vapor right back in my room. Just super gross. Anyway, there's that. Oh, interesting, Jerry. When Star Frontiers was originally released, it was a much harder sci-fi game that TSR softened. Oh, that's fascinating. I'd be interested in like what details got softened. Yeah, right? Yeah, I'd be very interested to see what the original rules were. Huh. Write that. I don't think I've read that. Dragon 65, you say? Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Jerry. I gotta read that. On my blog a couple years ago, I did a series specifically, I think I had about 4 articles on Delta's D&D Hotspot, specifically on the concept of interstellar space travel that popped up in the Nighthawks game, right? The second box set for Star Frontiers, and very different was in the first box, right? The first box clearly didn't think about it very much at all, and so the Nighthawk spaceship game by Doug Niles clearly revised, clearly set what the concept was for the space travel, and to make a lot clearly, it's clearly largely inspired by Asimov in the early Foundation books. It aligns pretty well, more or less. Doesn't use exactly, they use the word jump. They both use the word jump for the couple seconds that you're out of normal reality. Now, Asimov says hyperspace, and Nighthawks say the void. To me, it seems clearly basically the same thing. It's a little bit of a wonky concept in some ways. And so I think as I fill in the gaps and kind of, because I actually haven't shown my players the rules, so I can kind of go in different directions that I want to. I think I'm going to kind of fill in stuff with Asimov's ideas about hyperspace and stuff. You're right. There wasn't a huge amount of Star Frontier stuff in Dragon. I mean, for a while, they tried to have a separate publication called, I can't remember what it was called. But then they folded into Dragon magazine. They had there was the supplement at the back by the name of the thing that they tried to have a different magazine for. What am I thinking of? One of you guys is going to know. I did not know that, Jerry. Into the Void is a song about space travel by Black Sabbath. I did not know. That's great. Ares, thank you. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. Ares. So they did have some articles. They had, I feel like at least like a half a dozen or a dozen articles about new Nighthawk scenarios, I think. New Nighthawk spaceships that I did try to collect those. Okay, here comes the rubber. So here comes our 2-part silicone umu rubber as usual. Got to carefully, slowly now stir these and mix them together. Man, Jerry, you got a lot. This is like critical information for me to know about this game. That's invaluable. Now I gotta listen to that song. That's a good point, Sparrow, about the separate games. Yeah, I agree with that, Jerry. A ton of top secret stuff. I mean, Rasmussen was on staff all through that, so maybe you're right. There was a ton. There were a ton of top secret stuff. I did get an opportunity to play with Merle Rasmussen a couple years ago at a convention. Good stuff. He comes totally costumed like he's the administrator, so he's very committed to that role. I think I actually won a rubber ducky that is a hacker with a laptop computer that I have in my in my bathtub from Merle Rasmussen. Oh, this pink stuff is so thick. So I have to stir it thoroughly but slowly, not get bubbles in it. That's a real pain in the wrist. Okay, Dan, try to finding the joy in this fun little hobby. Just back off on the camera here. So yeah, so on this measuring cup that I made, so for two of them, I want the half of the part to come up to about 3/4 of a unit here. I have heard of Alternity, and I think Alternity, that was in their time, the time window when everything was going to be on a multi-success level chart. Right, so Marvel superheroes, and then I think the Conan game, and then Alternity were all like, the future is percentiles in a 4-level success chart. Am I right about that with Alternity? Okay, this stuff piles up, so. Not too much. That's not enough. Oh, is that right? Escalating die sizes? I didn't get that right. What do I think? No, right. I'm thinking of the revision to Star Frontiers is what I'm thinking of. Right, Zebulon's Guide to Frontier Space, that converted the whole system to one of those grids. That's what I'm thinking of. Right, and it was so. And I generally don't think about Zebulon's Guide. It's so completely overhauled everything that I like about Star Frontiers that it completely feels like a different game to my brain. That's how I made that mistake. Totally not the same game. Okay, is that enough? I feel like last time I came really close to running out of rubber when I was pouring the second mold, so I don't want to do that here today. Okay. have to clean that. I'm gonna have to clean that bottle off later. I got all kinds of stuff around there. Where's the blue bottle? Here's the blue bottle. Okay, so blue bottle, a lot easier to mix. It's much less viscous. We all try to not think about Zebulon's Guide. It's like very Matrix 2-y. Now, like Star Frontiers and Gangbusters, like all those non-fantasy games that are making these, they all use percentile dice. So Star Frontiers, Gangbusters, Boot Hill, they all use percentile dice. Sure. Other than that, I don't think the systems are very similar. I have a Gangbusters rulebook, but I haven't seen it. I haven't read it in ages. Oh God. Jerry's point about what that bit in Zebulon's Guide, it's right. This is among the reasons why we try not to think about it. That hurts my brain. I also don't like roulette wheels that have a 0 and a 00. That bothers the crap out of me. For similar reasons. You know what? Okay, I'm not gonna say that. Anywho, okay, so here comes the blue stuff. Trying to get as much of the pink stuff. So this ought to, I'm aiming to get to the 1.5 mark in total. Yeah, see, this is right. So thank you, Jerry. Every time this comes up, right? Zeb Cook was not involved in Zebulon's Guide. It's so confusing. Like I didn't want to talk about that because I feel like I have to look it up to reconfirm every time. It's so weird. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, be careful with this pour down. So just up to 1.5, which would be an equal amount of the pink stuff and the blue stuff. I think that's pretty good. The blue stuff is so much easier to deal with. Yeah, that credit to Gary on Oriental Adventures is really confusing. All right, so mix this slowly, thoroughly, but not get bubbles in it. That's the plan. Get all the material off the sides. Get it mixed consistently. I feel like last time it actually settled a little bit between mold 1 and mold 2. So I'm going to see if I can do better this time. Okay, now I'm getting, so I don't know if you can see that. I'm clearly getting some bubbles in here right now, so I'm going to go slower. Interesting. Fingers are getting a little tired. All right. That looks like a pretty good consistency to me. So I'm going to try to use this a little quickly, or quicker than I did last week. so that it doesn't settle out like it did a little bit. So step one is to brush it on the head part. Oops. That's what I did, right? I brushed it on the head part. Pretty sure that's what I did, right? Thanks, William. Thanks for the comments tonight. All right, I got a little bit of bubbles in here, so the brushing is supposed to avoid that. And you have an opportunity actually putting the brush in the rubber is getting more bubbles actually. But at least on the miniature, it gives you an opportunity to check. You could pop it if you needed to. If there's a visible bubble there. I'm not happy. The brush itself seems to be either bubbles are coming up in my cup or the brush is putting air in there. Okay. Get some under the head there. Okay. Inspect that really closely. I think that's pretty good. All right, so now I clearly have a couple bubbles in my cup. So now I'm going to pour in the corner and just let it spread over. You know, I'm trying to pour in a very thin stream is the recommendation I saw. Pour in that corner right there and just let it kind of seep over the rest. So... doing it a little bit fast. That might not have been my very best pour. I feel like I did that a little bit faster than I intended. I see one bubble there coming up. I hope I have enough for the other half. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to let that settle and start pouring the other mold. I have this sense that I might be short on rubber. Okay, so very, very thin stream in the corner right here. Yeah, this is thickening up pretty quickly. Very thin stream. Thinner, Daniel.
Yeah, I guess I should have mixed up more rubber. I'm actually kind of short on the rubber. Normally I make a mistake in the other direction. Alright, let me try to spoon out more of this. Okay. Pretty good. And I'm going to go back and pour some in the other mold here. I get this going. Just to bulk that up. Oh man, I'm making a huge mess. Okay, thanks to Sparrow. This other one I've just made a giant mess on. Trying to scoop out as much rubber as I could from the cup. You want me to gross you out with this? Sorry. This was me trying to spoon out as much of that as I could. That'll be fine. It'll be fine. Of course, the important thing for the bubble purposes is to get it smooth, right on the surface of the miniature. If I'm cruddy with the rest of it, or the bubbles and the rest of it, it doesn't matter. Or if the top surface is uneven, that doesn't really matter. I'll just tap this a little bit. I'm not entirely sure whether this does anything. Obviously, some people have these vibrating tables to get bubbles out of a mold. So I do this a little bit. You can. I clearly have some bubbles there, but I think it's mostly just that top layer I just poured. Even it out a little bit. This one looks a little bit smoother at the moment. Get those nice square corners if I can. Okay. Modulo the giant mess I made on this other one. Getting this on there. Just clean it up a little bit before we put it to bed. Mostly I'll just pull that rubber off when we demold it. And separate it next time. Okay. And there we go. So, most complicated miniature to date, as you can see there. Took quite a while to clean out all those entangled legs on the Vrusk miniature. So I'm really curious. I don't know whether this is going to work or not, and I'm going to be really curious when we take it apart next week, next Thursday, and I'll be in the kitchen and trying to actually cast these in lead. I'm going to be really curious how close we get to a good cast on both parts, right? Probably the head part, quite likely easier. Even that has the 2 horizontal arms out on the sides, which is non-trivial. And then all those legs on the body part. And then maybe I get the copyright notice in there. That would be that will be the A+ cast if I manage to get that amount of detail on it. But the main thing is to get the legs both fully formed and not like blob together. And hopefully fewer bubbles, right? So hopefully the anti-bubble technique that's new to me a little bit. Hopefully that's going to help down on the surface of the miniature, and that is where we are now with the Vrusk model. So don't forget. So again, if you weren't here at the start of the show, don't forget that the Wandering DMs has a Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/wanderingdms and get on our Discord server. And more importantly, for this week, super excited. We're going to have Michael Moorcock on our Sunday show. So we are super happy to get an opportunity to talk to the fantasy legend. And I'm personally hoping to get in some questions about Elric and the Eternal Champion. And it was basically his books that largely set the tone for the alignment system in D&D. So I'd kind of like to ask him about that. You know, he's historically known, you know, he met Tolkien, and he's historically known for some really critical thoughts about Tolkien and also Lovecraft. So he wrote a whole book about that called Wizardry and Wild Romance. So if I can get some questions in about how he looks back on whether those critiques stand up, I'd love to get that in the hour. And the hopefully you'll be in the live chat, and if you have some other questions, hopefully we'll have time to get some viewer comments and questions into Michael Moorcock. That's this Sunday, April 14th, and we run live at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, so hopefully you can join us then live for our chat with Michael Moorcock. Super looking forward to that. Super looking forward to that, yeah. So we're going to wrap that up for tonight, and thank you guys again for hanging out for the Old Time Mini Show and chatting about movies and science fiction, comics, and all kinds of stuff like that. Some really great observations from Jerry of things that I got to look up for my Star Frontiers game that I'm going to continue for session number 2. The first real session really tomorrow. So looking forward to that. And we will come back next Thursday and we'll crack these open and we'll see if I can get these complicated Vrusk miniatures to actually cast and put them together. So thanks so much for hanging out. You guys make this so much more interesting for me. And so much more fun. And your advice frequently helps here as well, so I appreciate that so much. And yeah, Jerry, I'm going to be doing your homework. I respect that. I need to experience that angle of receiving the homework. Totally true. So going to wrap up. Hopefully you guys, it's going to be very wet here in the Northeast, so stay dry and warm this weekend. I'll see you on Sunday, and if we miss you then, look at the archive show on YouTube if you don't catch the Michael Moorcock chat live, and then we'll be back next Thursday for more of Dan's Old Time Mini Show. Take care, everybody. That's all for tonight. See you later.